Today we're going to talk about the second house and the third house and what to expect when they combine together in a chart. Now, if you're wondering how houses can combine, there's a conventional way and a more unconventional way. The more unconventional way is if these two houses wind up in sequence or in a polarity in house code, which results from evaluating your houses. If you don't know the house code, it's not an easy thing to do on your own, but I can give it to you in my Houses of Life report. That's kind of one of the central things that's in that report is the DNA code of the houses. And you can get that at my website, which is victorcara.com, and just add a /H, and if you want to go straight to the report. So if you have in the sequence 2 and 3 in order, or 3 and 2, or 2 and 3 on opposite ends, then your houses 2 and 3 are combining. As for the more conventional ways that 2 and 3 can combine, you can put the second lord in the third house, or the third lord in the second house, or both. You can have the second and third lord conjoin each other someplace, or mutually aspect each other. And those are conventional ways that you get the second and third houses to interact. So, again, we want to know what happens, what's the interpretation of combinations of the second and third house. But let's begin by getting a clear picture of what the second house represents and what the third house represents. The second house is literally the sky that's under the eastern horizon. So it's associated with the ground beneath the eastern horizon, and hence it represents everything that supports the themes of the east or the first house. So the themes of the first house is to begin and to become visible, because the east is where the sun rises. So the second house, everything that the second house is about, is either in the category of being pro-beginning or pro-visibility. So on the topic of pro-beginning, what do we mean by that? Well, first of all, the second house signifies your family. These are the people that lead to your birth, right? They're pro-beginning. And besides your literal family, it represents all of your supporters. People who give you support means people that enable you to get things accomplished. So because it represents supporters, it represents also your friends, your actual real friends that support you. Another thing about the second house is that it signifies wealth. Wealth is pro-beginning. Wealth is the thing that you use, the resources that you use to do something, to bring something into being, to buy something, to get something, right? So second house signifies your wealth. And on this topic, it also in general signifies the base that you have, that you can draw from to manifest things in your life. That's literally what the second house is, isn't it? It's the ground below the eastern horizon. So it's the base from which we draw from to bring things into being. So it's wealth, and it's also this base in our life, which is like our stability and our foundation. Another thing that it represents is health. Health is basically going to be your strength and your energy that you use to do things, to manifest things. So health is also in this category of pro-beginning, bringing things to life. Since it represents health, the second house has a lot to do with nutrition and diet. And hence it represents the mouth and even the voice. Now, voice is related to something else, which is from pro-visibility. The fact that the second house supports the east means not only is it pro-beginning, it's also pro-visibility. Remember, with visibility, we're talking about things which are observable, seeable, knowable. So visibility represents knowable things, tangible things. The second house represents knowledge, the ability to comprehend things, the ability to understand things. That's what we mean by pro-visibility. Not taking something into the unknown, bringing something out of the unknown and bringing it into the known. So second house is for knowledge, and knowledge is also related to voice, because knowledge is transmitted through words and voice. And finally, the second house represents things which are knowable, things which can be seen, can be felt, can be brought into being. So the second house is a real place. In other words, it's a tangible place. It's a practical place. So this is the nature of the second house and all the primary things that the second house represents. Now let's take a look at the third house. The third house physically, literally, is the next one after the second house, right? Hence 2, 3. It is now the house that's on the eastern edge of the lower quadrant. Hence the basic thing that the third house represents is the lower stuff coming towards the east. East means visibility, and lower stuff means internal things. The stuff which is underground is the internal stuff. So the third house is basically our internal functions coming towards reality, becoming real, and coming towards the self. So there are 2 strands of meaning for organizing the symbolism of the third house. The first strand is the ability to get your internal feelings and desires to become real. The ability to do so, and the other one is the desire to do so. So the third house is pretty famous for representing our skills. And that's because skills is the ability that we have to take our plans or our ideas or our wants and make them real. So we look at the third house to see how skilled somebody is in general. We also look at this house to see strength. Strength is very similar to skill. Strength has different facets to it. One of the facets is actual muscle. So it takes muscle to bring internal things to physical form in the East, right? So the third house is about muscle power, making things solid and real. It also takes emotional strength to do this. So the third house also represents willpower and all the associated concepts like courage, bravery, and discipline. And finally, the very act of taking something internal and bringing it into reality is an act of expression, pushing something out. So the third house is very, very important, along with the fifth house, for seeing a person's ability to express. The third house flavor is specifically how they express their desires, how they express their motives, how they express their passions. Because as we look at the other strand of meaning in the third house, it's the desire to realize your ambitions. So the third house we look at to see the person's passion. How passionate are they? How much motivation do they have? How much lust do they have? How much drive do they have? This all boils down to how strongly do they want what they want? How willing are they to use muscle and strength and willpower to express their desires and fulfill their desires? Now, once we get into this concept of passion, lust, motivation, we start talking about what the person wants for themselves. East is self. And the third house is how the emotions move towards the east. So the third house talks a lot about how the person feels towards themselves, how self-oriented they are, how self-contained they are, etc. So it will show their individuality and their independence from social groups and from teams and so forth. Can they function on their own? Do they need to be part of a group? Do they need group recognition and acknowledgement? Or are they okay without it? The third house gives the strength to be okay without those things and to be sometimes defiant of those things. Now, furthermore, when we talk about individuality of a self pursuing their own desires, we're going to come into the realm of conflicting with other selves who are pursuing their own desires. So the final thing that the third house very importantly represents is competition. And competition can be organized here in various ways. Competition is how you use your skill, how you use your strength, how you use your willpower, and how you achieve the prize, right? So that's what the third house is about, using skill and strength and willpower to achieve the goal, to achieve the prize. Making the self more important than others You want the prize for yourself, so you'll compete for it. So the third house represents our competitive drive, how competitive are we, etc. And it also shows the people whom we compete with. We compete with our peers. We don't compete with people that are much younger or weaker than us. We don't compete with people that are much older or stronger than us. We compete with people who are basically equal to us. So the third house shows the people that are basically equal to us, our peers and our siblings. Now that we know what the second house represents and what the third house represents, we can pretty easily make sense of what would happen, what we should interpret when you get combinations of the second and third house. So let's take a look at the specifics of that right now. The first thing is that both of these houses are favorable towards the east. The second house supports the east, and the third house is on the eastern side of its quadrant. So there's going to be synergy here when these houses interact, because they're both pro-east. In other words, they're both pro-manifesting, pro-tangibility. And so here's a couple of examples. One is the fact that the second house is wealth-oriented and the third house is motivation, lust, desire-oriented. So the synergy here is the second house is about wealth and the third house is about desire for wealth. So when the third and second houses combine, it indicates a native who's wealth-oriented, who wants things. They want things. They'll have drive for things. Which is important because without drive, you don't have motivation. Without motivation, you don't get out of bed. Another thing here is pro-tangible, pro-east, pro-manifesting. The second is therefore about health, and the third is therefore about strength. So this is another synergy, strength and health. So when you have charts with people with combinations of the second and third, you should expect them to be healthy or strong and or into strength and health, and especially nutrition. But two important things I want to bring up besides these two that we mentioned already. One is it's not all good with the second and third house. There's one wrinkle here. And it's kind of a deep wrinkle. It's the fact that the second house signifies the family, but the third house is not family oriented. The third house is independence oriented. So there's a clash between self and group. So what you expect when this happens in a chart, it indicates people who have competitive natures that will be noticeable or disruptive to them, because they tend to compete with people they ought not to compete with. They tend to compete with, for example, family and friends. And in this matter, we can identify slight difference depending on which lord goes where or which house is in which order. When the third lord goes to the second house, or when 3 comes first in the sequence followed by 2, then you expect the family to serve you. So you'll get a bit of a laziness, actually, will come out about this. The motivation and the drive will be served all the time by the family members, and so the native doesn't develop a lot of self-reliance. And then they develop a sort of sense of entitlement that other people should do the things for them. If it's the other way around, where the second lord goes to the third house, or you have a 2 followed by a 3 in your sequence, then what you have typically is these family members are being competitive with the native, where they shouldn't be. They're not really being supportive. They're more interested in pursuing their own wants and needs than in helping the native acquire theirs. So people with this configuration have to watch out for self-serving friends and self-serving family members. People with the other configuration have to be aware that they're being a little bit self-serving towards their friends and families and should be more sensitive to that. Try not to do it. Finally, there's one other important synergy or a good resonance between the second and the third house. The second is about knowledge, and the third is about skill. These are pretty well related things because skill is the enactment of knowledge or the application of knowledge. So when the second and the third houses combine, expect the person to be pretty sharp. It's a good word, actually, because third house has a sharpness to it. Expect them to be pretty sharp mentally and be skilled. They'll kind of like to learn things, especially practical things that they can use. So they tend to be well informed and aware of the different options and technologies and tools that are out there that can help them accomplish things that they want to accomplish. So that's the basic nature of what to expect when the second and the third house interact with each other. Don't forget that we're exploring one isolated facet of a chart. Once you understand an isolated facet of a chart well, you can put it in the context of the other aspects of the chart. But avoid the temptation to only focus on one isolated aspect and ignore everything else in your chart, because everything is really going to be determined by how these individual aspects come together. So, for example, you might have the third lord in the second house, but we also need to know about your first lord, your fourth lord, your fifth lord, your sixth lord, etc., to get an actual picture of how everything measures up to you. But from today's video, you can at least know what this part of the puzzle means, and I hope that's very useful. Thank you so much.